The Remnant recently had an article by an Italian writer in which he kind of floated the idea, well, there's this kind of succession in time. You go through these phases. And Leo is the synthesis pope, according to this man's theory. Leo is the synthesis pope. He's going to regularize and normalize the antithesis that Francis was. The idea really draws upon the Marxist dialectic of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And he's applying that idea historically to the Novus Ordo popes, the New Order popes, starting with John the 23rd. And he goes through this process of saying, well, one was like, well, you had the thesis. Let's say you had the traditional Catholic faith as the starting point. And then you have the antithesis of Vatican II and the Revolution. Now what you need is you have the traditional Catholic faith as the starting point, the thesis. And then you have the antithesis to it, like the modernist changes. And then you need a pope who comes along and basically synthesizes the two of them together by saying, okay, we can blend these two things and come up with something that is neither this nor that, but is something, well, as they would say in Thomistic philosophy, a tertium quid, a third thing, which is a blend of the two. And then you need someone to come along then who takes that synthesis and regularizes it and normalizes it and says, okay, this is now our new normal. This is where our faith and our religion is now. We have the thesis of traditional Catholicism. We have the antithesis of modernism and the radicalism that followed Vatican II. Now we've kind of settled down into kind of a synthesis. But we have to normalize that, and that's the next phase. But then when you normalize the synthesis, and everybody kind of settles down that that's the new normal, immediately, as the Marxists would say, there arises another antithesis to challenge it. Then you have this conflict again between the new thesis and the antithesis. And again, you need someone to come along and synthesize this to resolve the conflict between the two of them. And you get a new synthesis and basically kind of a new religion, a new faith, which is not this or that, but now it's kind of a mixture of both. And then you need someone to come along and normalize that and say, okay, this is now where we're at. This is the new normal. And in this process, this young writer is saying, well, he's writing like a Marxist idea, but maybe the author who's writing this is not himself a Marxist. Maybe he's not saying, yes, I believe in the Marxist dialectic, and this is how history progresses, even as Karl Marx said. Maybe he's not saying that. But maybe what he's saying is, this is how the Novus Ordo popes are thinking. That this is the process that they're involved. And maybe he's actually recognizing that they're following a Marxist format in the way the modernists are proceeding here. He could well be saying that. So I wouldn't point at the author and say, well, you're just a Marxist yourself, proposing that this is how the Novus Ordo Church is proceeding. And I tend to think he'd say, no, I'm not agreeing with this. I'm saying that this is the program they're following because they seem to have this Marxist idea. And, he wouldn't be far from the truth. So it's not entirely out of the question that this author is right on when he says this is their program: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And, of course, he didn't actually come out and say this, but we know that it's impossible that this could be done honestly and really. Why? Because if the thesis that you're starting with is traditional Catholic faith, and the antithesis is modernism, it's impossible to have a synthesis between the traditional Catholic faith and modernism, between the traditional Catholic religion and the New Order, which is the religion of modernism. You can't synthesize things that are intrinsically opposed to each other, essentially mutually negate each other. They would annihilate each other. There's no such synthesis possible. Only in the Marxist mind could this be possible. But if you synthesize traditional Catholicism, the thesis, with modernism, the antithesis, if you try to synthesize them, what you wind up with is not traditional Catholicism. It's just modernism. But what you're doing is you're nudging everything down that road farther and farther and farther down the modernist road. With every step of the way, every synthesis takes you farther and farther and farther away from the traditional Catholic faith until you come to complete apostasy. And we've seen that happen with people today. You've seen it happen with clergy who've left the church, left the priesthood, left the church, left the faith entirely. Thousands of them. So, and religious sisters too. Because they've started down this path. Now, according to this man, Leo is in the synthesis phase. He's taking what was the new normalization. Well, let's go back like John the 23rd. Okay, yeah, John the 23rd, he was bringing in these changes, okay? And people were getting a little nervous. He called Vatican II, but he died after the first session of Vatican II, and Paul VI took over. So Paul VI completed his work, and you had there this antithesis. What Paul VI brought in, all the changes to the Mass and the sacraments, the catechisms, everything changed. That was the antithesis to the traditional Catholicism that went before. And then you needed someone to make a synthesis of the traditional faith and the traditional religion and the radical revolution of Paul VI. And John Paul II was the one. They elected John Paul I, but he made a tragic error, according to Father Murr in his book, Murder in the 33rd Degree, by wanting to expel Masons from the Curia. That's Father Murr's point. And so they got rid of him. Within a month, he was gone. And he was replaced by John Paul II. And John Paul II, whom they considered to be this great conservative, he was simply the synthesizer. He was the one who synthesized the traditional Catholic faith with the modernism, the modernist revolution of Paul VI. So his role was to be a synthesizer. And then after him came Benedict. And he was the normalizer. He took the synthesis and made it normal. And this is the new normal, okay, for Catholicism. And then Benedict, of course, Francis comes in. Right? And he is the new antithesis. He's like the new Paul VI, bringing in the antithesis challenge of modernism on steroids, as they are. And of course, then the next step is to synthesize the Catholicism as John Paul II had synthesized it with the Francis, radical modernism. And this is where Leo comes in now, to synthesize these two things, bring them together, show that they're perfectly compatible. So you come up with this third thing, totally dedicated to Francis' program, but smiling and being very nice and very calm and cheerful and wearing the right clothes, living in the right address, saying the right words, sounding Catholic at times. And he's going to try to make it sound like this is perfectly legitimate synthesis. And then the next step after him is going to be where it's all normalized. The idea of the Synodal Church is now the new standard of what it means to be Catholic. So Leo is going to accomplish what Francis did not live to, and what Francis himself probably could not have done, because he was the antithesis. He's not the synthesizer. Now Leo is the synthesizer, according to this author. It's an interesting thought.